Hey everybody, welcome to the Trudy Myrtle podcast. I'm Libby and this is my weekly podcast that beams out into the internet on Thursday mornings at 10 o'clock New Zealand time on Facebook and YouTube. And I can see you there. I can see some thumbs up already. How nice. Morning, Lynn. It's wild and windy. Yeah, wild and windy with us too. My gosh, we've had some crazy wind this morning and last night and yesterday, and it's been very windy. How are you all? It's lovely to see me. So lovely to see you here. This is a live podcast, so you can chat to me in the comments. I can see your comments when you make them. Here they come. Hi Tamsin, nice to see you from sunny Rangiora. Slightly cooler. I'm rather enjoying that. Goodness me, I had such a long podcast last week. I didn't intend for it to be so long, but I just kept talking and it got really long. So I'm not going to have such a long podcast today. Hi Barbara. Hi Rosie from Hobart. Hi Claire, nice to see you. Hi Linda from Melbourne. 33 degrees is your top today. Hey Becky, 30 in Sydney. Hey Sue, I'm imagining that's Sue from Southern California. You're just back from a great trip to New Zealand. Oh, that's really nice. What if you got decent weather? Did you get decent weather when you were here? It's hard to tell. I think we've had some beautiful weather actually. Hopefully you have had some good weather. Hello. It's very chilly in Northern California. I think that's what it might be today. Hi Rachel, you got to leave in 15 minutes. I better hurry up then, hadn't I, Rachel? Chop. Right, Libby, get on with it. She's got to leave. Sad. She said she's sad about that. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about maths today. Hi Jenny, nice to see you. And from the Netherlands, Winky Girls. I don't know who that is, but hello, nice to see you. West Coast in Canada. It's so nice to see you all. I love seeing you all. Mangawai, New York State. Are you working on your Advent fiber this morning? I'm regretting not getting a fiber. I'm regretting not getting an Advent kit this year. They always put them out way too early. I'm not even in the vein of thinking about Christmas when everybody starts advertising them. And I'm just like, oh, I actually would have quite liked an Advent this year. It's a bit sad. I haven't got one to open. I know I could make one for myself or something, but it's not the same, is it? Not quite the same. Everyone's getting blown away all over New Zealand. It's been a bit windy. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about maths today because I got a really good question. I was going to talk about something else. I'll talk about that another day. But I got a really good question in the form which you can submit your questions to at trudymyrtle.com/ask. ASK. If you have a question, you can pop them in there and then I will answer them. And I'm going to focus on one question. I got a really nice comment. I'll tell you the nice comment. It's always nice to have nice comments. It's not a question. This is another one that was in there. Hi Libby, great to get your list of prep for a top-down garment today. That was last week's podcast. That was so long. I never used to be specific about my measurements. I just used a size and invariably ended up with a tent. As yes, I always chose a size too big. Look, it's so common. It is so common. I even do that, so don't worry. So thanks for that. I love your weekly podcast, even if I hear it a day or so later. And that was Leonie from the west coast of Ireland. And it's also blowing a howler over there. So that's really nice to hear that from Leonie. Anyway, Tina left a question. And I thought, this is actually a really good opportunity to blow your minds. No, I'm not going to do that. It's a nice opportunity to talk about some of the basics that you need to do knitting maths. And because once you grasp just the fundamentals, which are really not that tricky, I know it's numbers and we're over that, finished that, left that behind at school. It's actually really helpful just to have your head wrapped around a little bit to do with particularly swatching maths. So I thought we'd focus on that today, and I'll just talk a little bit about swatching because this is the question. Tina, she said, I'm going to knit the Baystone jumper. That one, Baystone. My gauge is 18 stitches after blocking, and she's tried a couple of needles. I was going to knit a size 3. Should I knit a size 2 with my gauge that I'm getting? Thank you for your help. And I thought, this is a great question because this is the kind of question we cover a lot inside Wardrobe Toolbox. And if you're interested in knowing more about this or really understanding it and getting to grips with it, then you'll want to come and join us over there. If you're already there and you're thinking, I don't know all that, then there are lessons there that can help you. But basically, what's happened is for Tina is the gauge for this pattern is 20 stitches per 4 inches or 10 centimeters. And that means that in a 10 centimeter or 4 inch distance, we can squeeze 20 stitches. So they're all sitting next to each other like sardines in a tin, and there's 20 of them. And Tina's done a bit of swatching, and she's found that she can only get 18 into that sardine tin. And so she's thinking, what does that mean about my stitches? She didn't actually ask me that, but I'm going to say that. What does that mean about her stitches? She can only get 18 in, and that means her stitches are bigger because she can't squeeze as many stitches in. And it's weird because the number goes down, so it's sort of counterintuitive. She only gets 8, so she's got 18 stitches for her gauge versus 20 that you need. But actually her stitches are bigger, not smaller. Even though the number is smaller, the stitches themselves are bigger because we simply can't get enough sardines in our tin. I think that's the first thing to wrap your head around. And just thinking in terms of because I think we can get all upside down and wrapped around with the number, but the bigger the number, the smaller the stitches, because more are being squeezed into that tin. That's, I think, the first thing to remember. So she said she was going to knit a size 3. And a size 3, she's obviously worked out that would be a good size for her. And in a size 3, if all her stitches are too big compared to what's called for in the pattern, that means when she knits a size 3 and she casts on, I'll see how many stitches she cast on for size 3, 1, 2, 3, 90 stitches, her 90 stitches are all fatter. So a little bit of fatness on each one of those sardines is going to mean that she's going to have this sardines bursting out of the tin. So she's going to have 90, and her gauge is going to be bigger than 90 in the original gauge because they're all a little bit sort of trim and fitting into the tin. So she's right. She needs less stitches to make the size that she wants. And so she's right. Going down a size to a size 2 is going to help her a lot to get a smaller size. But it doesn't end there. And that's what made me think, I think this would be helpful to kind of just talk through some of that really basic knitting maths when it comes to gauge, because then and choosing a size, but it all comes back to gauge, because then you can start thinking beyond just going to a new size. Yes, we can go to a new size, but maybe Tina can do a little bit more, and I think she can. So we've decided already that, okay, she definitely needs to go down a size. Is one size enough? Or maybe she needs 2. So the thing to work out first is, what measurement at her gauge is she going to get around the bust when she gets here, and how close or far away from that desired measurement is that? So she's got this desired measurement around the bust for a size 3, and you can find all of this information on that page there, the sizing page, in the back or the front, depends on, no, it's always in the back. So she's got for a size 3, the bust circumference, I'm going to talk in inches, but you can convert all of this to centimeters. So her desired bust circumference is 48. The nice thing about this sweater is it's quite sloppy, and so you can get away with a little bit of difference. And so at the end of the day, Tina might just knit a size 3 and be done with it. But I thought it would be interesting to walk through some of the thoughts that she could have around choosing that size, or whether she could tweak it. So a 48 inches around the bust, and that works out to be about 122 centimeters around the bust, is what she wants. Now in her gauge, she's going to get that's going to be a little bit bigger with that stitch count. But let's go back to size 2 and see what happens if she goes to the size 2 that she's thinking of casting on. How big does that end up being? So I've written some things down. The first thing to remember is that when you're working out gauge, you take your gauge per 4 inches or 10 centimeters and you divide it by 4 if it's inches and 10 if it's centimeters. Okay, and that gives you your stitches per inch or your stitches per centimeter. I'm going to stick to inches for this question, but you can easily do it with centimeters. So she got 18, and 18 divided by 4 is 4.5. So her stitches per inch are 4.5 compared to the pattern, which was 20 divided by 4, which is 5. So you can see it's only a little difference, but it's half a stitch difference for every 4 inches around the body. So, okay, so she knows, first she starts off by thinking, okay, I want 48 at the bust. That's quite good for me. 48 inches around here, my full bust circumference, because that's the size that I chose. That's what that's got. In my gauge, I get 4.5 stitches for every inch. So the first piece of maths to think about, we've done the first piece of maths, we've divided our gauge by 4 or by 10 to get our stitches per inch or per centimetre. The next thing to think about is if I need 48 around my bust and I have 4.5 in every one, then I've got 4.5 times 48 times will tell me how many stitches I need roughly at the bust. And if she multiplies 4.5, did I do that thing wrong? 4.5, 48 times, all the way around here, 4.5, 4.5, 4.5, 4.5. So 4.5 times 48 is about 216. So she needs about 216 stitches around her bust in order to give her her 48-inch ideal bust circumference. What does the pattern say? I wonder what size 2 actually does. Like how many stitches are at the bust for size 2? We'll have a little look. So for size 2, if you go to the part here, body, and you're separating the body from the sleeves, we want to know what stitch count is left on the bust, including the underarm stitches, and then we can decide whether or not she's going to get what she wants for this fit. So what did we say she needed? 216. Well, when I look at the bottom here, I've said join the work in the round and place a marker, and then I've told you X number of body stitches are left on your needle. That's the place we want to be looking. Good, thank you, Gay. She's saying 48 times 4.5. 48 times 4.5 is 216. Thank you, that's brilliant. Okay, in the pattern, size 3, which we were abandoning, needs 240 stitches. Well, she's way off that. Next size down, size 2, needs 222. That's close, isn't it? She needs 216, and she's going to, if she follows the pattern exactly for size 2, she's going to end up with 222 stitches at the bust. It's not too bad. It's not too many out. The next size down, 201. Too small. Too small. That's much less. That's 15 stitches less. Whereas the difference between 216 and 222, that's only 6 stitches. So it's not that different. It's just over an inch. Just over an inch. So that means that if she follows size 2 exactly, her bust circumference is going to be closer to 49 and a half probably, 49 and a quarter, something like that, than 49.25 I've written, if she follows size 2. So what she needs to think now is, okay, I could follow size 2 exactly and not make any changes. My bust circumference is going to be about 1.25 inches bigger than I'm thinking I wanted it to be. So what can she do now? Well, what she could do is she could go back to the pattern and she could say, I don't want to muck around with it too much. But what I would like is by the time I get to here, I'm not swimming. And so maybe for the very last increase that I'm going to do at the bottom, increase 6, instead of following the increase in the pattern, I'm actually going to do less increases by 6 so that when I come to divide the body and the sleeves, I've got less stitches for the bust. I want to be thinking about how many stitches I'm casting on under the arms, because if I just knock those back slightly, I'll probably get the same distance under the arms. And maybe I want to also think about my sleeves. How big do I want my sleeves? So she can do the same equation for the underarm stitches, the sleeve stitches, and the body stitches. That same equation. If I have 4.5 stitches for every inch, and I need this many inches around my arm, or this many inches under my arm, how many stitches do I need? And in that last increase round, she could increase only enough stitches that she needs to get to a size that she wants. And she might base it on what she did think she wanted with size 3, even though she's going to start with size 2. Now, of course, it's going to mean that you could go even further. You could go back to the neck. You could see if it gives you the circumference you want in your new gauge. You could do a different rate of increases before you get to this stitches in the round. You could do different increases in between. You could take over the whole pattern and turn it into yours. The one thing that you'll want to double check and remember when you're doing other equations through the garment is that the stitch count that you need for this, the bands through the yoke, these bands here, these bands here, and the stitch count that you need for the same pattern at the cuff and at the hem is a multiple of 3. Now happily 216 is actually a multiple of 3, so she'll be fine if she just gets to 216 for the body, but she probably also wants to think about what she wants to do for the sleeves, because if we're thinking that the body's going to be a bit bigger, the sleeves are going to be a bit bigger as well, even when she does the size smaller. So she might want to knock it all back just a little bit. I'll leave it there as far as it comes to Tina, but do you see how you can take your gauge, divide it by 4 if you're thinking in inches, divide it by 10 if you're thinking in centimeters, and then you can go through the pattern on this page at the back and you can build your own schematic. So you can go to this page here and you can take all of these places in the pattern and you can build your own schematic, and you can do it with rows and you can do it with stitches, and you can change these numbers, or you can write next to them or write on the picture here, how many stitches do I need at this point to give me these measurements, how many stitches do I need at this point to give me these measurements, and so on. How many rows am I going to work here to get me the length here? And so you can redo the pattern with your own numbers. That's the main point I wanted to get across, is that you can be the boss of your knitting. And when you understand a little bit about this maths, and it's not tricky maths, I said a whole lot of numbers then, and it sounds like it's really confusing. But if you break it down, boom, 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 step by step, this is primary school maths. You can totally do this maths. Then you can be the boss of your knitting. And of course, people are here to help you. You're not all out there on your own. I'm just going to read your comments a little bit. Oh yay, Charlotte said, this chat has inspired me to cake my yarn and swatch for Baystone. Yes, well, swatching is key, I think. Hi Di, nice to see you. Gay says, this only confirms why we need to swatch. Confession, I never swatched until I joined Wardrobe Toolbox, and now I understand the value of the step, the value of having it's a little patience before launching in. Yeah, it makes such a difference. If you need a multiple of 3 and the sleeves and body will be a bit big, I would drop 3 stitches out if both underarm cast-ons for the easiest adjustment. Yeah, you could definitely do that. You could just take out from the underarm, but don't forget, if you're fiddling around with the underarm stitches, then it's going to affect the sleeves and the body. And so you could just lose 3 under the arm. You could do that if you wanted. You can decide how you get there. There's like a few different roads. In fact, my husband was just saying to me before, a friend of my son's has popped in here the other day on his speedy little bike, because he's just ridden from university in Dunedin. He rode south to the bottom of the country, and then he's just ridden the length of New Zealand, and he arrived at our house up north. We're just out of Auckland, and he's going to carry on, and then he's going all the way to the top of New Zealand, and he's ridden the whole way. Amazing. It's taken him a couple of weeks so far. And my husband was telling someone yesterday, and he said, which route did he take? And we're like, we didn't ask him that. We didn't ask him which route. But there are many routes to get from the bottom of New Zealand up to where we are. And this is the same for your jumper. There are many routes to get to what you want. You can just decide what is making most sense to you. There are no like hard and fast rules. What makes most sense to you? How are you going to get there? This is the opportunity. You know how when you're at school and you had to learn certain ways of doing things for maths, and they were the rules, the maths rules, and you're like, yeah, but I got to that answer and I didn't do what you said, but I still got there. And they're like, no, you have to use the rule. You can do your way this time. This is your opportunity to say, I'm going to just do it my way. I don't care that there might be a different way, because this makes most sense to me. I can remember it for next time, and this is how I'm going to do it. That's what you can do this time. I'm freezing on Facebook. I've had a nightmare with Facebook this morning, Barbara. It took me 20 minutes to try and hook back up to Facebook, so sorry about that. Hopefully I'm not freezing everywhere else. It's been a journey to learn to enjoy swatching, learning that it's the step where I'm playing with the yarn. I think that's key. I'll come back to you if I get a chance for Adira. I'm wearing Adira. Actually, let me just answer that really quickly now. There's a question about what is the best fibre to knit Adira? Silk, silk and linen, silk and alpaca. Any good suggestions you'd like it to flow? All of those will have lovely drape. I'm wearing Adira. I'm wearing my big Adira. I wore the small one last week. This is the big one. And this is a pure silk, and it's got creases. It creases. That's one of the things about it. It's got beautiful ripple. You can see the ripple in it. If you want it stay in the realm of a ripple, go for fibers that have a bit of movement. So linen would be lovely. It's got nice relaxed movement. It's a different sort of movement. It hasn't got that wave like ripple like silk does, but it definitely has a movement to it. Alpaca is soft, and so it wants to, it sort of it cuddles around. It doesn't have the same. This is a real ripple. Silk has a rippling water. The others have like a soft curl, or linen has like a relaxed drape. And so you embracing those sides of them. You can use cotton. Cotton is heavier. Cotton has more of a ripple, I think, a bit like silk. I think you can get a bit more of a ripple out of it. It's not the same, and it's a little bit heavier. It's a slightly more dense ripple. It doesn't have that ethereal nature of silk. So you can you don't have to go too wrong, but swatching is key. Right, this leads me on to the second thing I wanted to tell you. Before I say that, I'm going to tell you, I've redone the Swatching Basics handout that I've got. It's a little free guide. It's very brief. But it just gives you the reminder of your swatches, your stitches from your swatch, and it's a tiny bit of maths I've added in. I don't think that was in there before. I've got links to a couple of things that I've done about choosing colours and actually the mechanics of swatching. So I've got links to those things in it, and you can grab that if you go to, I can't remember what the page is, but basically if you sign up to my mini mag, trulymyrtle.com/mini mag, it'll be in the mini mag tomorrow. I'll make sure that you can download it from the mini mag, and if I can remember, I'll put it in the show notes under this video so that you can go and grab it later, and it's a good head start. Now, I like to think about swatching. I had never heard anyone else talk about this, but this is what occurred to me once I started designing knitting. It never occurred to me before. Do you know what? It never occurred to me to swatch before I started designing patterns. It just didn't occur to me to swatch. Why would I swatch? I think when I started thinking about doing them but not actually doing is when I started swatching. I'd never even heard of it. I didn't even know what the numbers meant in the pattern. Like, you'd look up a pattern and they'd have this weird stuff about numbers, number, cross, number. I have no idea what that was. And I just ignored it. I just ignored all those things. Measurements for the size. I mean, I just took the measurements. I was mostly knitting for my kids. And before that, when I was a young girl, I was doing a lot of knitting in my early 20s, late teens. I didn't care what size it turned out because I just put everything on and it all seemed to be baggy. So that was fine. But I'd take the measurements of the kids and then I'd knit it and then I'd be like, sleeves are quite long. Oh, well, we'll roll those up. I mean, I didn't even think about it. So when I started thinking about knitting, a pattern designing, that's when I started thinking about swatching and I started practicing and I was like, whoa, this is like mind-blowing. I had no idea that this was actually maths. I always loved math. I had no idea that knitting is maths. It's a lot of art, but it's actually mostly maths. Okay, so what I decided to do was I had to think about, I had no idea about blocking either. What even was blocking? I learned about blocking. And it's basically you're just washing your garment, laying it into the size it should be, so it looks beautiful. It's a good idea. Anyway, I realized that swatching has several purposes. The first purpose is to learn about your yarn. What does your yarn want to be? Because it can be very easy to look at a skein. Here's a skein. It can be very easy to look at a ball and to say, that's wool. I know that's wool. It's Corriedale. It's difficult for me now because I've learnt so much about yarn, but I would look at it and I would look at another one and I think they're all just wool, aren't they? They're all just, and because we called everything wool, that's the other thing. It didn't matter if it was cotton or linen or silk, not that you could ever get those, but we called it all wool. It's just wool, but it's yarn and it has lots of different fibers in it. I don't know what it's going to do on my needles. I don't know how big the stitches want to be. I don't know what it wants to become. I don't know any of this stuff until I put it on my needles, because like a toddler, where they have to feel everything with their hands in their mouth, I don't necessarily feel my yarn with my mouth, but I need to feel it on my fingers before I know it. And so I'm exploring it with my hands. And so putting it on my hands, putting it in my hands, let it run through my fingers, get it onto my needles, I start to get a feeling of the yarn. And I start to get a feeling of what it wants to be and how it's best going to sing. And so that's the very first reason why swatching is useful, because you can get a feeling of what does this yarn actually want to be, because we've heard about yarn whispers, and it's true. Yarn whispers to you, and sometimes you really have to have a little play with it for a couple of evenings or a couple of different swatches before you think, I don't really know what this wants to be. And then all of a sudden, if you just stop thinking about it, you let it download from the cloud, all of a sudden you're like, boom, okay, I know what it wants to be. It's told me, I'm listening. And then you can make it into that thing. And so that brings, do you have yarn or pattern first? I think it's good to have pattern first when you know about yarn. I think that's quite good. Hi, Lynn, nice to see you. So learn about the yarn, do a decent size swatch. You don't actually have to do a massive swatch for, I'll take that back. Don't have to do a massive swatch when you're trying to learn about the yarn. You can do a tiny swatch. I think I showed you my swatch the other day, which I've now not got here, to see about what the yarn wants to do. And I'm going to give you an example of some tiny swatches that I've done to figure out what does certain yarn want to be. How are things going to work? Look at these teeny tiny swatches that I've done. Look, this big. What does it want to be? How are the colours going to play together? That's the next thing. But first of all, what does the yarn want to be? I'm not sure. Does it want a pattern? Does it want a texture? Does it want big stitches, little stitches, open, small? I just need to have a little feel of it on my needles, and I rip it out. I don't always keep those little tiny swatches, but here's another little one that I did. You just do little one. I just do a little square like that. Just see what does it feel like? What does it want to be? How big are the stitches want to be? And once I've got that sussed, then I think I've got one here actually, because I've got a new top for Wardrobe Toolbox, and it's waiting right there. Where did I put the bag of yarn that goes with it? I did some little swatches to see how big I wanted those stitches, and they're just ditty. So that's the first thing. You can do a little one. The other thing you can do a little swatch for is to check if colours go together. And so that's another thing that I was doing here. Colours and patterns. And do they go, how do the colours work? I'm doing a little bit of playing with colours. These colours working well together? That's a bigger one. Looking at colours. You don't have to do giant swatches. They can be quite small, these swatches, to figure out if you like the colours playing together. And you can do lots of different experiments. You can do them on the same swatch. I'm trying to find some more. I've got so many swatches in front of me. This is ridiculous. Look, I've got boxes. Look at this. I've got boxes and boxes of swatches. That's one box. Here's the other box. I've got boxes of swatches everywhere. But basically, you can do quite small swatches to figure out if you like. See? If you like stuff. What do you like? You like the colours? They working together? It's really useful. I've told the story a million times about my floozy top and how we didn't get the pattern. I didn't give everyone the pattern until 2 weeks after the full pattern, until 2 weeks after it was released for the beginning, because I wanted people to be able to get the yarn that we were doing. Yarn Floozy and I did a collaboration, and I wanted everyone to be able to get the yarn from her, so we delayed the full pattern 2 weeks. So I put out the page, I put out this page. When you signed up, you got that page, you got the cover page, and you got that page. And that's all you got. You didn't get the other instructions for 2 whole weeks. And then we started a knit along. And man, that was so interesting, because people would start swatching and we'd talk about colour combinations. This was Floozy. This was one of my ones for Floozy. I had heaps of these sorts of things. And we'd start colour combinations and they'd have a play at putting colours together. And people were saying, oh no, these are awful. These are awful together. Well, this looks like my school uniform. I heard that. The one I heard the most was, this is like Harry Potter. And so they had opportunity to rip back. So figuring out if the colours go together and if those are colours you like together, excellent. Do just a little swatch. You'll know immediately whether or not you like it. The third reason it's a really good idea to do swatching, just the little swatching, is because you want to figure out how to do a new technique. How do I actually do the new technique? Is there something in here that I've never done before that I want to try? And if so, look, there's another one where I'm practicing a new technique and practicing colours. That served both purposes. And is there a technique that I want to try? Picking up the band on the edge, the ribbing flowing from the pattern. do I really know how to do all this stuff, or is there something that I want to experiment with? See if I've got something else where I'm trying a new technique. Oh, here's a really big one when I was trying to work out what the yarn wanted to be. Look, I never did anything with that, but you'll notice I did something with some of those patterns. Look, trying out little stitches and techniques on things. I do that all the time. Look at this one. Trying out the cables, seeing if I like them on different things. So trying out techniques. If there's something that you haven't done before, just have a practice. That little one I showed you before, this is another good example of having a practice. Where was it? Oh, there's a little bit of lace. Look, doing a little bit of lace to see if I like that and that yarn. Practice, practice, practice. Doesn't take long. It can actually quite fun. There's a good one where I practiced doing, I ended up not quite doing this because I could see once I'd done it, the patterning into the hem and then picking up the ribbing down one side. I could see I wanted to change this, which I did. So I made the ribbon go all the way up into the pattern. So you can practice, practice, practice different patterning and different ways of knitting. And can I improve on what's been said in the pattern? Is there a stitch in here I don't really like? Is there an SSK that I want to make better? Should I twist the stitch instead of leaving it plain if I'm lipping it? Maybe I'd like to do a different way of doing a double decrease than they've suggested in the pattern. All of those things. You just can do a little swatch and practice those things. So those are the reasons that I would do swatching. That's the primary reason why I do swatching. Find out about your yarn, figure out what it wants to be, work out if your colours are going to work together, work out if there's any stitch patterns you don't know how to do, and then is there anything about this that I actually want to change? Is there something about the patterning in here that isn't working for me, and then I'd like to change it? So those are all the reasons I would do little swatches. The next reason for doing a swatch, which is the only thing people think about when they're thinking about swatching, is to figure out how big your stitches are. And when you're going to figure out how big your stitches are, that you just have to suck that up, because it's essential to know how big your stitches are. It's not the funnest part, but it's an essential part if you're making a garment. So when you're going to do a swatch to figure out how big your stitches are, you want to make it a decent size. So I'm talking big like this kind of big. And you'll also want to find out, am I knitting, here's a slightly bigger one, am I going to be knitting flat or in the round? And I'm going to do whatever is called for in the pattern. These are all in the round. I'm going to do that in a swatch as well. So if the pattern is knitted entirely in the round, like this one, this Baystone pattern, then I only have to swatch it in the round. And so here we go. I'll do a swatch with the yarn I intend to use, with the needles that I discovered I like on the little swatch. I'm going to do a big swatch in the round, and I've given you a link to a video that shows you a couple of ways of how to do that, and in that handout. And then I'll be able to count my stitches, and I'll know how big my stitches are and how deep my rows are, or my rounds are in this case. If the pattern is entirely knitted flat and it's pieced, for example, and then you're going to seam it, then you only need to do it flat. Where's a nice flat swatch? I've got a lot of swatches knitted in the round, I have to tell you. I must do a lot of things in the round. There's a nice flat one. I want to find a nice flat one. Here's a nice flat one. Here we go. Do a nice flat swatch, a big square. And this is a lovely one because you can reuse that yarn if you need to. You're not going to cut it. And then once you've done your big swatch, you could actually do it square rather than rectangular like I have here. You could make it as square. Once you've done that, then you count your stitches. Where's some more? There's one I've put a border on. I generally wouldn't advocate putting a border on these days. A garter's okay if you're doing stockinette, but be very careful with putting borders on if the border doesn't let your stitches inside explode, because it will make everything much smaller. We talk about that in interesting wardrobe toolbox. So yes, you do a nice decent swatch, and once you've got that, then you count your stitches and you count your rows. You cast on about 40 stitches or more, and you knit until you've got about a square. You want more than 4 inches or 10 centimeters deep, so that you can measure in the center you can measure that central area to work out what your stitches are, because too close to the edges, it could get a bit skew with because of the way we knit when we think we're coming to the end, or when we're just getting started, or when we're on the edges. So you want to focus your attention in the center, really. If you do more, you can measure a bigger distance and then work out your swatch that way, your gauge that way, which is actually more accurate. But at the very least, you want to choose a 4-inch or 10 centimeter area in the middle, not from all the way across. That's going to give you a wonky gauge in the middle. So those are the things. That is why you would do swatching. And then once you have the numbers, just knowing that maths that I talked about before, these are my stitches per 4 inches or 10 centimeters, and make it a round number. Don't make it an uneven number. In fact, if you're finding that you're always getting a half stitch or a quarter stitch when you're doing that measurement, measure over a wider distance and then work backwards from that. And so you end up with you can round it once you've done round it at the very end, and then you can end up with a whole number. It just makes your life a bit easier. Knitting is stretchy. It's not that stretchy, but it is a bit stretchy. So you can then work out my 10 centimeters or my 4-inch gauge, and I can then divide that by 4 or 10, depending on which of those two it is, and then I would work out my gauge. Would I block the swatch before counting? I would count it, then I would block it, and then I would count it again. I think that gives you a good idea of what is going to happen to my yarn when it is blocked. But also, if you count it before blocking and after blocking, and you know that your after blocking gauge is what you need for the pattern, when you're knitting your work and you're measuring, then you know what your pre-blocked gauge is. So if you're knitting to length, for example, and you know that your gauge grows a lot, then you won't need to knit as many rows, say. And you know that it's going to grow, and then what you could do is you could say, okay, it's just asked me to knit 2 inches, and I know in my pre-blocked gauge and my blocked gauge that's X, but in my pre-blocked gauge it's my blocked gauge it's this. And so you just know that you count the number of rows that you're going to have to knit, and then you know that it won't measure right, but that's fine because you already know that from measuring it before you block it. It just helps you know that if you're on track. You can also check your gauge. So if you're knitting along and you measure it and it measures the same as your pre-blocked gauge, then you know you're doing good, because it's going to block out just like your other one did the other way. So I would do it both. It's so interesting seeing and feeling the difference, even going from a 3mm to a 3.2 needles when swatching. It really is. It really is. The other thing you can do is you can try different needle tips. So if you have the opportunity to have metal tips, carbon tips, wooden tips, plastic tips, and all of those things, you could try different tips, long tips, short tips, all of those things, and see if they make a difference to your gauge. What you might find is they might not make much of a difference to your stitch count, but they might make a bit of difference to your row count. So if you're trying to squeeze something into a particular gauge and your row count just will not work, maybe try it on another needle of another make, another fiber, like go from metal to wood or wood to metal or whatever, and see if it makes a difference to the row gauge. I know it all takes time. I know that. But once you've got this stuff sorted, then you can just relax and you can just enjoy knitting. People say their swatches lie, and that's true, they can lie. But I think if you do a good size swatch, when you're doing full gauge, we're talking about gauge swatches lying, the numbers. If you do a good size swatch and you're really conscious about how you're knitting when you're doing it, and how stressed you are, and how fast you're doing it, and I'm just trying to get this done, and I'm feeling like that, and then I get to my project and I'm like, thank goodness, I'm just going to relax. Well, your swatch might be quite different than your eventual project, so be mindful of that. And try and knit the same. Don't knit really stressed the whole way. Maybe just like lower the tone of the swatch stress, and you'll do the same in your garment. So those are my main thoughts. But let's roll back a little bit, because then the maths is then another layer that you layer on top of that. So your knitting maths all comes back to the swatch, And essentially you're thinking about squeezing sardines into a tin. And if you've got little fat sardines, you're not going to get so many in. And if you've got really skinny sardines, you're going to get a lot in. So that's a bigger number. And those numbers make a difference when we're trying to choose a size. And knowing, if like Tina, when she's thinking, I'll just go down a size. Yes, you could just go down a size and it would mean that the whole size is smaller. But is it small enough? Or could you tweak it a little bit more yourself by taking your gauge that you know you've got from your swatching and working out how big do I really want it in order to get it that big here, 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 and under here. How big do I really want it in those places? And how many stitches do I need to get to have it that big in those places? And that's where we take our gauge per inch or per centimeter and we multiply it. It's just a simple multiplication. Multiply it by the distance. So if we've got, so this is, let's say this is under my arm, and I know I want it to be, I don't know, what's that, about 5 inches? Let's say I want 5 inches under my arm, and I know that in my gauge I have 5 stitches for every inch. Then I go 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5, 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5. 5 inches, 5 inches, and there are 5 stitches in each one of these. 5 times 5 is 25. I need 25 stitches to get across here. Let me see your comments. It's better to take the time to swatch properly and end up with a garment that then end up with a garment that doesn't fit. Yeah, I agree. I think it's time well spent. It's a good idea to measure your knitting as you knit to compare with your swatch. I think so. I think compare it with your swatch, but don't forget your pre-blocked gauge versus your blocked gauge. Because if you know that your knitting is going to drop, then measuring to length might get you in a bit of a tricky situation. It might be better to convert that distance to rows. So it's the same idea. You know you want to knit this many rows down. You want to knit, what did I just say that was? 5 inches of rows. And you know that you have 5 rows in every inch. 5 times 5 is 25. That means you need to knit 25 rows. You probably want to make it 30 if you're knitting 26 or 24 if you're knitting flat, because it needs to be an even number. And then when you've knitted that many, then you know you've got to the right distance, even if it's not quite measuring that, but you know what your gauge was. And you know that your pre-blocked gauge was different. But you can definitely, what a pre-blocked gauge does is it helps you feel better that your swatch isn't lying. So that you can say, I wonder what I'm knitting. I wonder if I'm knitting. I wonder if I've got the same gauge. And you can say, well, I knew what my gauge was before I blocked it, so let's just check it on this. Have I got that gauge? Yes, I have. I've got the same gauge on this, but I'm knitting now as I did on my swatch before I blocked it. So I'm good to go. So I think that's where it's really useful. I save my swatching for after dinner knits when we're down watching a movie. They grow over a couple of night sessions depending on how absorbing the movie is. I agree, Gay. That's what I like to do too. It can just take a couple of evenings. Sometimes you can knock it out in one evening. Depends on if you've used the yarn before, if all sorts of things. I can take a couple of weeks trying to work out what on earth does this yarn want to be and what kind of pattern am I making. But if I'm at the designing end, it can take me quite a long time to get all my swatching done and really let it percolate and think about it. But if you've got a pattern, you know you want to make this, and you've got yarn and you want to see if these two things will marry up nicely, you can do that in a couple of evenings. What does it mean when my gauge is the same on 3mm and 3.5s? The first thing I'd do was I would check that your needles truly are those measurements and that they're not actually the same or very, very close, that your 3 isn't a bit bigger and your 3.5 isn't a bit smaller, because technically they should be the same. The other thing that might be happening is that you could be knitting, you might be a firm knitter, and you might be knitting not on the point of your needle. You might be making your stitches way up on the barrel, because ideally what's meant to happen is that you have your point of your needle and you make the stitch on the small point, you create it down here, and then you slide it up onto the barrel to actually get it to be the right size. The barrel is the measurement, that the 3mm or 3.25, that the 3.5, that is the circumference of the barrel. And so when we're making it down here and we're sliding it up, it goes to the right measurement. If you're making it up here and then you're yanking it tight on here, I think you'll find that it'll make a difference to your tension. It's subtle, but the idea is it slides up. It's meant to just kind of slide along. It's not meant to be like yank along on that needle. And you might find that you're tightening it up here on the barrel. And I just would watch that and see if you can't train yourself to just slide them up and make them differently. But I would first check the size of those needles and just see, because you would expect there to be a little difference. I mean, that's 0.5 millimeter. You would expect there to be a bit of a difference on those two needles. It's also important to know how the fibre in your yarn works, i.e. the weight, particularly if you have silk or such in the mix, as it grows in length with the finished garment. Absolutely, CJ, absolutely. And that's when I go right back to that very first comment I made about swatching, and even just a little swatch, and understanding what is this yarn doing? Like, what is even in it? What is it like to be? How does it feel? And what am I getting? What is happening with this yarn? Tell me about yourself, yarn. And that's why you want to swatch in the first place. Tell me, am I going to try and push a round peg into a square hole? Are you really not going to work for the garment I'm thinking? Or are you going to work beautifully? If I want something really drapey and flowy like the top I'm wearing, and I make it out of something like this, let's pretend it's the same weight, and it's a round Corriedale wool, bouncy, round, great stitch definition, it's just simply not going to have the drape. It's not going to have the drape of this. I'll have to have super, super big stitches, but even then, this is not a drapey fabric. This will not create drapey fabric. So knowing a little bit about that is important, and then knowing what happens to your yarn when it wash and blocks is also great to know. And I like you to hang your swatches. If you've got something that you know is going to grow in length when you're wearing it, like a linen, then I like you to hang your swatches with a little bit of weight on the bottom if you think so, if you think it needs it. If you're using a heavier yarn, or you're making a fabric with a garment which has a lot of bagginess in it, a lot of ease, then that's going to add weight to your final garment. And so you might want to add a little bit of weight to your swatch at the bottom, just to see if you can't make it sort of reflect a little bit about what's going to happen in your garment, or you'll find it ends up at your knees. Jenny said, I always check my needle size in a metal gauge as I find it consistently accurate. It's a good idea, Jenny. And someone the other day mentioned about using a gauge from the company you bought it from. That probably isn't a bad idea, but yeah, I think those plastic ones over time, I think you make them bigger, and I think a metal gauge is probably the way to go. They're less likely to grow, aren't they? But check your needles. Check your needles. Okay, I think that was all the bits and pieces. I don't want to overwhelm you. I probably have. I hope I haven't overwhelmed you. It's really fun, and once if you just take it step by step by step, rather than just eat the elephant one bite at a time, then I think you will find that you can master this. You will find it just becomes second nature to you, and all of a sudden you'll be thinking things you never thought you would know. Anyway, I will put this swatching basic handout in my mini mag tomorrow. It is a really basic, just get you started. I talk about how to swatch. It's a good one if you haven't even thought about swatching before, and I'll make sure that's in there, and I'll also replace it with my other swatching guide. They're similar, but that one's newer. I've got a few extra things in it now, so that you can become a lover of swatching. Imagine a lover of swatching and a lover of knitting maths. I think it's really fun because you get to be the boss of what you're doing. You be the boss of your knitting if you want, once you've got the maths under control. This is your best friend. This is your best friend in the pattern. That is your best friend. That page. Okay, use that page to pieces. And then where you can see through the pattern, note in the pattern those points find them in the pattern to see how many stitches are being used at the full arm circumference, how many stitches are at the full bust circumference, how many stitches at the wrist, how many stitches at the neck. You can actually start marking that off in your pattern and build your own pattern. It's such a good feeling when you can do that, because it's just off the peg. These are all off the rack. It's the same as when you're buying clothes in the shop. You know, it's a standard sizing, and to make them work for your shape is so fun. It's so fun to make them work for your shape. Oh, excellent. You enjoyed that. Good. Husband is amused at how enthusiastic I get over a swatch and how I like the fabric. It's so good though, isn't it, Gay? Because I think, let's think about it another way. Let's think about it. If you, it would be like, it is like being someone who sews and thinking, I'm not going to sew. I'm not just going to sew that dress. I'm going to make the fabric. I'm going to make the fabric. You might even dye it before you start. You might even grow it if it comes out of your paddock. I am going to make the fabric. It's like, this is the ultimate in creation, isn't it? It's just the ultimate creating your own clothes, when you are literally making the fabric for your jumper. That is wicked. When you think about it like that, it's wicked. So when you want to make the fabric, you want to know how dense the weave is. If you're a sewer, you know that different fabrics behave differently depending on how they're, what you've got in front of you, a denim versus a chiffon, for example. Well, this is the same. We're doing that. We've got that extra important step where we make the fabric, and that is all swatching is about. That is what it is about, making the fabric. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, you might even weave it. You might even weave it yourself. Oh my gosh, imagine. Swatching and learning knitting maths was a game changer for knitting garments I love to wear. I know, and I have watched how your knitting and your garments have evolved, Barbara, and they really have, haven't they? It's just amazing. Linda says, thank you. It's so important for me to understand. That's really good. Amanda says, I love knitting maths and see the importance of swatching, but I'm not a lover of it yet. Sometimes it feels like an evil necessary evil. That's fine. That's fine. As long as we know we have to do it. It's like the dishes and washing the toilet. Like, you just got to do it, even if you don't feel like it. You can think of it like that. And holding different yarns together, it is individual. Yeah, unique. You can make totally unique fabrics. Yay, you're watching me live at last from Two Rocks in West Australia. Nice to see you. And you don't, and T Kiwi Creative doesn't even need to imagine. She does it. Excellent. You see? You do it. You are making everything from scratch. It feels so good. So good. All right, everybody, I'm going to leave you there. And I hope you have a really happy week of knitting. We are creeping closer to Christmas. I think Christmas is 3 weeks today. Is it 3 weeks today? Let me just check my calendar, because I think it might be 1, 2, 3. It is 2. 1, 2, 3. Which means I'm going to have a break off from the podcast over Christmas. Last year I recorded a whole lot of stuff, but I'm trying to just do a little bit less at the moment. And so I haven't recorded anything. I haven't done anything like that. I'm actually going to take a bit of a breather. So I've got 2 more weeks here live with you on the podcast, and then I'm going to disappear for a couple of weeks, and then I'll pop in and out a little bit in January, and I'll be back properly in February. But although I'll be away again in February, just for a little bit, it's all go around here. But so I'll see you next week. We've got next week and the week after, and then we're done ski. I never used to swatch, but so glad I did for my daughter's jumper, as it was 2 stitches out and a 10 ply. It would have been huge. Yeah, exactly. Have a nice advent. Yeah, I know, and I wish I had something pretty, some yarn to open. Never mind. Remind me next year, everybody. I'll have to get myself a lovely advent. I hope you have a lovely week. Do heaps of knitting. Do some swatching. Maybe even do some swatching, because you can actually do a bit of swatching before you finished your last project. Did you know that? And you can actually just get started on, take an evening and just like have a little knit, and then dream big dreams about what you're going to do next. You could definitely do that. If you're not on my mini mag, join my mini mag so I can send you that swatching basics form. It's trulymercial.com/mini mag. Do that. I'll send that out tomorrow in the mini mag. And otherwise, I'll see you later. Happy knitting, everyone. Bye. See you later.